Developers choose DynamoDB because it's fast, scalable, and flexible. It's not unreasonable to expect sub-millisecond read latencies for point lookups in DynamoDB thanks to its distributed design, global replication, and automatic and efficient caching mechanisms. But there's always a but. While DynamoDB is great for real-time transactional use cases, it is not great for real-time analytics. If you're trying to run aggregations in DynamoDB across partitions, things are going to get real slow, real fast. Fortunately, there's Tinybird. In this screencast, I'm going to show you how to import and sync data from DynamoDB to Tinybird using Tinybird's managed DynamoDB connector so that you can build real-time analytics use cases over your DynamoDB tables. Let's ride. So one use case where DynamoDB really shines is gaming. It's a great database for massively multiplayer online games. In this example, I have a simple table in DynamoDB called Game Scores. Each item has a gamer ID, a level, and a score that tracks the top score for each gamer for each level. This table is being updated in real time as new gamers play the game. Now, DynamoDB would be great if I just wanted to get the top score for a particular gamer on a particular level. But what I want to do is build an API that provides a percentile ranking of a particular gamer's score compared to all other gamers in the world. For that, I'll use Tinybird. First, some prerequisites. Tinybird's DynamoDB connector uses DynamoDB point-in-time recovery to perform an initial backfill operation. So I need to enable PITR for DynamoDB, and I need to have an S3 bucket set up where I can store that initial snapshot data. Second, Tinybird uses DynamoDB streams to subscribe to CDC-style chain streams that keep Tinybird in sync with DynamoDB. So I need to enable DynamoDB streams as well. Okay, I'll head over to the Tinybird UI and my workspace in the AWS US East 1 region. And I'll start by creating a data source and selecting DynamoDB. Now first, I need to create a connection to authorize Tinybird to read from DynamoDB and the S3 bucket that will hold my initial backfill snapshot. I'll name this connection DynamoDB Game Scores. Then I'll head over to AWS, copy the ARN of my DynamoDB table, and paste that into Tinybird. Then I'll provide the AWS region of the DynamoDB table and the name of that S3 bucket. Once I've done that, Tinybird will provide two JSON snippets. The first is to create an access policy in AWS that will allow my Tinybird workspace to read from the DynamoDB table and the S3 bucket. So I'll copy that JSON, open AWS IAM service, create a policy, select the JSON editor, and paste in that code. I'll give the policy a descriptive name and create it. Next, I need to create an IAM role. So I'll select Custom Trust Policy, head back over to Tinybird, copy that JSON snippet, and paste it in. I'll click Next, and then I'm going to add to this role the access policy that I just created in the prior step. I'll name the role and create it, and then I'm going to copy the ARN of that role, head back to Tinybird, and paste it in. Now, Tinybird has the role that it needs to be able to read from DynamoDB and S3. When I click Next, Tinybird connects to my DynamoDB table and shows a preview of the data it contains. Note that Tinybird is not schemaless like DynamoDB, so I need to map my DynamoDB items to typed columns in Tinybird. Fortunately, Tinybird does the heavy lifting here by analyzing the data and inferring a schema based on what it sees. I can adjust my data types if needed, but Tinybird usually does a pretty good job. And if I want to get more granular, I can always open the code editor and modify the schema definition in code. Now, once I have my schema how I want it, I'll click Create Data Source. Tinybird will now begin the process of backfilling a current snapshot from DynamoDB. First, Tinybird initiates a snapshot export of the DynamoDB table to S3. And if I head back to my AWS console, I can see that export job. Once it's done exporting to S3, Tinybird will ingest the files for the initial backfill. Once that's done, Tinybird will then subscribe to the DynamoDB stream, receive change data events in near real time, and automatically write and deduplicate records to keep a stateful copy of my DynamoDB table in Tinybird. From there, I can create a pipe to query that table with SQL. Now remember that I wanted to get the percentile of a specific gamer's score compared to all other gamers. So I'll type out some SQL to do that. And in that SQL, I can define dynamic query parameters for the gamer ID and level. When I'm done, I click Create Endpoint and publish the second node. I now have a real-time API endpoint that accepts gamer ID and level as query parameters and provides, in milliseconds, the aggregated score percentile for that gamer on that level. Tinybird pairs really well with DynamoDB to give developers a platform to build real-time analytics use cases over application data they already have in DynamoDB. The DynamoDB connector provides a fully managed import and sync between DynamoDB and Tinybird, so you can avoid writing any ETLs or managing any infrastructure and just focus on your use case. For more information about the DynamoDB connector, check out the docs. And if you have any questions, come find us in our public Slack community. We'll see you there.